Okay, so as usual, I walked outside for a while and I've realized that there were some examples that I should have made to kind of contextualize a little bit more the subject matter and give some examples, stimulate people uh, to see what we're talking about by describing some scenarios, some visualizations, and so I'm going to do it as a attachment and a little part two thing. And so I'm going to give two examples, two pretty simple or basic, if you can call them basic, but scenarios for people to see a little bit what I'm talking about. When we are talking about cowardice, also in this context, in this kind of conversation, one of the things I noticed, it's a little hard to find, at least my vocabulary is very poor. And so perhaps I'm going to open the source while I'm talking on my PC. But that it seems to share a space with dishonorable. And why I'm saying that is if you can picture a situation, well, let me give the examples and then you'll see what I'm talking about. Let's take the two examples are the case of hunters for sports hunting, and the case of the Malvinas Falklands War between Great Britain and Argentina in 1982. These are good examples because they're simple in a sense. That war was not a really a huge, complicated war like most wars that have happened on the earth. It's got a fairly simple narrative. Um, but the one sports hunting, game hunting is really one that touches the heart of a lot of us, and so for us to be able to understand, for so that you can see where I'm trying to use or how I'm trying to see if we can um, stimulate the proper conversation. Because we say we hate these people when they're posing next to the dead leopard or tiger or giraffe, and we're just in. But the point is transforming society into something better. I don't want to say fixing, but enlightening, enriching the caliber of emotional intelligence, lifting society to where we no longer do it. And for to do that, this horrible kind of activity against free, innocent animals, um, for many reasons, or for at least several reasons. It's not just about having compassion or being a good person and not wanting another living being to suffer, or not wanting to see people be so ignorant or mean or vicious and cruel or unintelligent, because it does require intelligence to acquire love for free living beings on the planet. It's not just a capacity that you can awaken. You have to kind of be versed with some ideas, and then all of a sudden it starts stimulating appreciations, different sparks of appreciation until you start getting it, and that starts growing and developing. But it is also because we may want to see us become a better society, and this teaches children, this teaches society and people values and ways of reasoning the use of weapons or the treatment of animals a certain way, and so we become what that does to our society. We become it, right? So it's getting dark in here. So going back to the usage of the words, when a hunter, you know, basically chases a lion and shoots them with a rifle. I mean, you're having an animal that doesn't even know really what's happening. Um, Perhaps is scared, and there's just no way that the man holding a rifle is in danger, and they make sure that they're not in danger. They're protected by other people who have rifles. And so at that very moment, that person is shooting the lion. What can one deduce is happening through that person's brain? I can see and I can imagine easily a controlled, suppressed feeling of cowardice for obvious reasons, because what otherwise, so here's where we're missing a lot of vocabulary, and this is why I'm making these examples, because it's disgraceful, it's dishonorable, and then we realize that when we want to really get into the dynamics, the psychological dynamics that explains what that person is really being like, we realize that, I hear people say he's such a coward, or he's a coward because they attacked defenseless people. But then you start thinking, were they feeling fear? Were they feeling cowardice when they did that? We use that word, but are we actually really in touch with a feeling of cowardice and fear happening in the heads of that hunter, or those people who attacked a handicapped person, for example, or kicked somebody while they were down on the ground and then they started bashing and kicking their head? I mean, you could easily say, what a coward. But they weren't feeling fear at the moment they were doing that. So as you see, it's kind of a difficult area to actually speak with knowledge on our own, about our own psyche and what the dynamics, and yet we're generally in the right ballpark. And we can say it's dishonorable, and I can't think of anything else. I'm going to look at the source, see what else I spoke. And what is interesting is that it's not a given. It's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all, or the necessary feeling that that person will have, because it depends on that person. Because in the case of hunting for sport, hunting animals, we're no longer, if you watched the last video, we're no longer talking about the basic natural psychological configuration created by evolution. We're talking about mostly about how we develop that, what form we take on, given our culture, our teaching, our education, our society values, and how we grew up, what we grew up believing. And that's really what defines the behavior of the, oh, okay, there it is, the behavior of the hunter. And in this example, we may find, therefore, many different cases of people. We can imagine somebody laughing at the value of life. I mean, thinking about their emotions and thinking that, like hee-hawing and hee-haw, look at him run, I got the sucker, and you look at that person hunt the animal and you think, wow, what an ignorant, like he's beyond help, like how can you possibly have him understand what he's actually doing? And then you see somebody else who's all educated and he thinks that he's practicing a high sport that requires bravery and courage. And he lives that, and he feels that he's in danger, because he focuses on that 0.0% possibility that a lion he didn't see might jump out from behind a bush. And so with that person, perhaps you could have a conversation. Of course, you won't accept that he's being dishonorable, dishonoring, disgraceful, or cowardly. But so one of the definitions I have is a person who shows a shameful lack of courage in the face of danger. So the hunter that has convinced himself he is in danger, even though he's not, or he's suffering very little danger, could really come to understand your argument that you're saying, for lack of a better word, to me that's cowardly. he may come closer to having that conversation with you. The person who's all like, yee haw, whoa, whoa, Nelly, let's kill another one, that guy doesn't feel himself being in danger because he thinks rifles are the cat's meow, and he wields 10 at the same time, and he'll kill anything that comes towards him. And so it's a little harder to have the conversation where so that you would try to raise this person's consciousness, let's say. Synonyms: chicken, crave, defeatist, quitter, cream puff, milk with toast, whatever that is, pushover, pussy. It's not really what we're talking about. What are we talking about, really? What are we talking about? Someone, when we speak about someone who would not, in an equal playing field, remotely do what they're doing, what the gun, the rifle is allowing them to do, in the sense of abusing or killing another living being. It's almost like, what do you call the person who steals from old ladies that, the famous case in New York? I forget his name. He took everybody's pension money because they trusted him, and they gave them money for him to double it around, to make money. I forgot, Maddock, right? I think it was. And there was another one in Australia too. And anyways, some people would call them cowards because they took advantage of trusting people, innocent people. But really, does the definition apply? It doesn't really apply. I always found it interesting that there seems to be a word missing here. There seems to be dishonorable, disgraceful. What is it exactly? So help me get this conversation going. I'm going to put disgraceful, see what I get. So the other example was the War of '82 between Britain and Argentina. Now, many of you probably are not very too familiar with that war, but I'll simply try to describe it from the humanist perspective, not from the dispute or the conflict perspective, but from the human perspective. We're talking about British soldiers, British people who grow up in a country where you're listening since you're a toddler about your war's victories and how you became great after World War I, and that the communists were da-da, and that the Nazis were, and we saved the Holocaust, the Jews and the Holocaust, and all thanks to our weaponry, and so it's honorable to be strong and strong armies and da-da-da. In America, our culture is kind of similar. You grow up, right away watching cowboys and Indians, and we are cultures that are all about having armament power, and we grow up watching movies or reading books that have to do with, when I grew up in Argentina, when I went to Argentina as a kid from the States, I remember noticing when I would go back to the States and watch horror films on cable, that Argentina, they didn't have horror films or gore films. And watching The Lone Ranger or Zorro on TV was, wow, that was the only time you saw a gun. Of course, I wasn't an adult and I wasn't aware of the reality of Argentina's history with guns and all the wars and everything, but the society was very different. And in fact, the soldiers that went to fight in Malvinas were people that you have to understand, you have to picture a society that is so far removed from being raised in a culture that glorifies war. It's completely the opposite. They really, logically, of course, they know that there's war, but Argentina is not a country that has engaged countries in wars since pretty much colonial independence days. The last skirmish was with Paraguay or Uruguay, technically, but it wasn't really. Paraguay was a big, huge war they had, and that was lots of people died, and it was like the bloodiest thing that Argentina. Not talking about what the military dictatorship did to the subversive movement, the the desaparecidos, that is not about weapons, and it's a culture, it's a Catholic country, and so like in Italy, um, the police are a little bit more modest. you know, they don't look like RoboCop, like they do in the States, about wielding guns. So the soldiers that went to Malvinas, I mean, you can almost picture them going to check on their mom every day, and they probably lived around the corner, typically from the provinces. And even the soldiers that went from the cities, they grew up in a completely different peace-faring nation they had to do military service by mandatory military service. And, when they do military service, it's really about teaching them to take being mistreated and suffering and cold and roughing it in the mud and being, it's they don't get like academic teaching on war strategy. It's not a warring country, and so the soldiers that it's very hard for people that speak English perhaps to understand, really, to really put themselves in the place of the Argentine soldier and what their mentality and their heart was about the situation they were forced to go into, because it wasn't like the British soldier that's, oh my God, my country looks, this happened, we're probably going to war. Before even the government made an announcement, those that were in reserve, that were in the military, were already seeing if their equipment was polished and cleaned. It's two completely different soldiers, and so you can then imagine what the confrontation was like, and how everything was kind of a rise to the occasion of bravery for the Argentinians. This is it. This is really what it's like. It's a kind of a discovery. While the British soldier, and we're generally speaking, we're really generalizing, was kind of running into what they were already imagining and thought they should expect, and the order, the administration, the teaching, the being raised in that society, and that kind of learning their entire war history by the time they're 16. Two very different situations. So again, we want to talk about, because when these two sides fight on Facebook groups, you hear a lot of bantering, childish, immature, kind of street level, insolent bantering being written. And I'm going to try to not take sides here. And one of the things that is said a lot is coward, and they make fun of the Argentinians surrendering. And the Argentinians, they could easily say, what? If anybody was a coward, it was you guys who just kind of warred against soldiers like us. But that, of course, argument, I don't know, is maybe too ballsy, maybe a little bit too complex or too mature in caliber to make. I say it. They don't like me too much. But, beyond this discussion, what is interesting is to learn to apply vocabulary properly and correctly in situations that would require us to use words by their true definition. And so to imagine, for example, the arrogance of a British soldier, noticing that the Argentinian was afraid. Because what you have, it's very interesting. You have two types of cowardice or fear on both sides. This is what's interesting, and we still haven't found the right word here. Dishonorable, disgraceful, shame. When you don't care what shame looks like on you, there's no word for that, is there? I mean, there's so many words that we need to acquire, enrich our vocabulary to be able to describe this human being, to describe ourselves in our minds better. So we use blanket words like cowardice, but you could say that there were two Argentinian soldiers. The one, as far as cowardice, the ones that, because you have to understand, I start from the premise that choosing to use a weapon against another human being is already an act that stimulates our natural psychology to contemplate um, dishonorable, shameless, cowardly, cowardry, cowardry, because our mind did not evolve to confront somebody pulling out a steel object to could be present a threat. That's something we only invented these last 5 minutes of evolution. And so when we cannot, no matter how much, well, yeah, then we later cover it with logic, but initially, and reasoning, but initially our first reaction when I have to use a gun against another human being is that I'm taking advantage of something that he won't be able to defend himself against. And so this is what I'm trying to, with the last video, I'm trying to create a debate, an argument, a subject, a discussion about. Of course, then logic and reasoning immediately take over, and you're thinking, well, he has a gun too, right? And so that's the end of that. But it does matter what unmovably and perpetually will be the source, our source foundation for things to start from. And so every time we use a gun against another human being, even if that other human being has a nuclear weapon, there may be some nourishment or feeding of an excuse to suppress cowardice and therefore become a little more cowardly as a person, because now you're willing to just use that gun kind of regardless of what the other person's circumstances are. And so you have the Argentinian soldier that was really believing in the evil of weapons. There's, I mean, non-warring nations have a lot of people, and religious nations have a lot of people, and even the States and England, I'm sure, there are a lot of people who basically regard the gun as perhaps very few in England, I don't know, regard the gun as something evil that you don't want to get close to. And so I know for sure in Argentina, people, entire towns of kids that grew up riding horses, and some friends would go out hunting quail or something, but was faced with needing to kill somebody with armament, probably had a lot of challenging emotional experiences, and found it really hard. That when you put that person before the professionalism, the unstoppable war machinery of the British Army advancing, you can see how that person felt. Perhaps at one point got scared and shit it in his pants. So there's different uses of a word that we use all too generally and blanket a whole area with repeating, and we don't refine it into words that are more specific. Then let's take another Argentinian soldier that, let's say he found himself a trench with British soldiers that couldn't reach their weapons or something, and they asked him to please not shoot them, which I think it was more the other way around, but and he just shot them anyways. And so that's another kind of shameful dishonor or cowardness. See what the problem is? There's a lack of vocabulary, and it's such an important area of human civilization. And then of course you have the British soldiers, which also have two examples, two cases or various cases on both sides, various cases of different levels of courage or expertise or affirmation or confidence in themselves or willingness to kill another on both sides, varying degrees of this, that would cause the other side to also have modulating feelings go through their heads in each case upon using that weapon to kill another. So basically, I gave these examples so that people can imagine a little bit how to talk about this, and perhaps more useful, the example of the hunting of the game hunter, the huntsman, because that you can see the despicable person. It's just horrible. You know, especially if you know animals, and you know that they're not really looking to hunt you for fun. Most of them, anyways. The vast majority, 99% of them, are not looking to hunt you for fun. Maybe cats do. I don't know, but you know what I'm trying to say. Practice. But you know the heart of a lion, and you know the heart of somebody who is just laughing at the fact that that lion will never be able to do anything to them, and that they will hunt them, and they take that life away, and all of a sudden 15 years of an animal's life, or 60 years in the case of an elephant, are just robbed from them for that person's moment of arrogant glory. Guns have a lot of vocabulary pertaining to what they bring up and they cause and they stimulate and they require from the human psyche, what they will eventually foster in society, or what they may require from a society for them to continue proliferating. That requires a lot of willingness to be able to talk about ourselves and what is happening to us, instead of talking about ideologies that describe describe an analysis on my interpretation of somebody's behavior, which detaches us from simply knowing the brain of ourselves, of human beings, which is what I talked about in the other video. And in order to not continue going down, getting worse that way, we need to go back to the classical human sciences that actually talk about how our mind, all the different shades of emotions and reactions and just natural psychology, that dynamics that happen in our brain, if we want to be able to have a good handle on our own inventions, on the invention of civilizations and all the things that we subject and enclose ourselves at its mercy, because it's an inert artifact. It's like a cage that we design for our comfort, but we put ourselves in it, and then if we stop to understanding how it affects us, what it naturally brings out in the human brain, well, we would be very stupid, wouldn't we? So I think it's very important that we go back to this, Okay, there we go. Bye.